Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Page. I'm the music director and conductor of the Portsmouth Symphony Orchestra, and you're very welcome to the first of a series of lunch-ins with the maestro, as we've called it. This is obviously our attempt to continue to bring quality music and musical experiences to the Seacoast community at this time. We already have other live and recorded performances which will be put up on our website and on Facebook as things go forward. But from me, this is the beginning of a series that we've decided to call Symphony 101. If you're familiar with my pre-concert talks, you'll know that I do a little bit of explanation before each concert to try and give audiences a way in, an access point to the performances that we're about to play. This format is, I'm going to take a step back even further and go back to the very basics of what is an orchestra, why we do this, why it's important, and what people can do to get themselves involved in the world of orchestras and symphonies. So I decided I would start at the very beginning. Bear with me, but we're going to talk about what a symphony orchestra actually means and distinctions. So a frequent question I get is, what's the difference between a symphony orchestra, a Philharmonic orchestra, and what is a chamber orchestra? What are all these things? Are they different? Do they really mean something? So I just want to start with the terms themselves, just so that we're all pretty clear about where things have come from and what they mean. An orchestra, what does that mean? Today, it basically means a large group of musicians playing together. They could be 65 people, it could be 25 people, somewhere in between, maybe 100 if it goes up to Mahler symphonies, big pieces by Shostakovich, Strauss, Richard Strauss. So huge variety of just sheer of people on stage, and styles as well. It's anything less than about 20, 25, 15, you're heading more towards the world of chamber music, which is a whole different realm. But the word orchestra itself, it comes from a Greek term. It's actually from Greek theatre, and I have printed off, I hope you can see this, a little diagram. So you will see the outline or the architectural design of a Greek theatre. And right bang in the middle is the orchestra. The orchestra was the place, it literally means a place for dancing. And that's where, it's actually in front of the stage, it's not the stage itself. This would be the scene, which is the stage. But it's in front of the stage, and it's where the dancers would have been. Obviously, Greek theatre had people in masks performing. But this is where it comes from. Here's another little diagram, maybe a little more detailed, but that is pretty much what it looks like. And that's the Greek theatre. And here's the scene, which is the stage, basically. And there's a proscenium, which we now know as proscenium, but that's pro-scene, which basically literally means in front of the scene. And there's the orchestra right in the middle of it. So that's where the term comes from. It actually comes from Greek theatre. And I suppose it's lost in some ways its original meaning. It now just means the group that plays on that stage. A large ensemble of musicians. The terms symphony, Philharmonic, chamber orchestra, what do they mean? Are they the same? Are they different? Very simply, a chamber orchestra is a smaller version of a symphony orchestra. A chamber orchestra typically performs pieces that call for 20 to 30 to 35, maybe up to 40 people. But that's effectively what a chamber orchestra is. It's a smaller version of a full symphony orchestra or a Philharmonic orchestra. It's usually with a conductor, sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have conductorless chamber orchestras, which are very common these days. There's one in New York called the Orpheus uh, Chamber Orchestra, and also at Union Conservatory, the chamber orchestra there has no conductor. It's all coached by a very close friend of mine, Don Palma, an amazing musician, and he's involved in Orpheus as well. So he brought that model to Boston. The other group in the area you might know is a Far Cry, who grew out of a group of students who played in the NEC Chamber Orchestra. So they don't have a conductor. And the role of the conductor is obviously something people talk about and ask questions about, and that's going to be part of the upcoming series. I'll definitely be addressing that. What do I do? What is it that the conductor actually does? What's all that about? So we'll get to that. But meanwhile, back to orchestras. So chamber orchestra is a small orchestra. Chamber basically comes from camera, meaning a room. And this is going back to how music used to be played in small groups in people's houses. Camera, musica in camera, or chamber music. So symphony orchestra and philharmonic. That's a question that gets asked a lot. And today, there really is no distinction between these two things. They are just large instrumental ensembles that play the big classical music repertoire. Usually symphonies, but concertos, overtures, a whole range of things. That's really their role. So today they don't really have much of a distinction. It tells us more about where they've come from than what they are. Philharmonic orchestras grew out of the idea of a Philharmonic society. So you had a group of music lovers in a city or in an area, and they would put on concerts, Philharmonic concerts for the society. Philharmonic comes from the Greek, love of harmony, love of music. So these were music lovers who wanted to present concerts. And when they presented large concerts, like an orchestra, they would call it a Philharmonic orchestra, the Philharmonic Society Orchestra. That's how the New York Philharmonic got its name. But today, it's really evolved into all of these big orchestras have this very similar structures, similar purposes. Very different. To draw a distinction between these two things today is really they're essentially the same thing. Symphony orchestras, Boston Symphony Orchestra, Portsmouth Symphony Orchestra. It's what it says. It's an orchestra that plays symphonic music. So that's really the distinction between these two things. So that takes me to what is a symphony? Now, big question, and I'm going to keep it pretty simple at this stage. A symphony is essentially the jumbo jet, the 747 of classical music. It's the big, heavy carrier. It is the form that composers chose to go to create a large piece of significance. It evolved over the years. It started as small pieces, usually with a few movements in it. So you would have, what I mean by movements is just a piece within a piece. So it's like a scene or a chapter in a book. So you have, movement 1, 2, usually a slow movement, 3, usually a dance movement, 4, usually a fast finale. And that's kind of how it got settled. So today we think of it as being this flexible, malleable, but definitely distinctive multi-movement form. So it's got at least 3, 4, 5 movements. Some have 6. Mahler's Third Symphony, one of the longest symphonies there is in the mainstream repertoire, has 6 movements. So it's flexible. It evolved. Like everything, it just evolves. There's nothing set in stone. But it was the form that many composers chose to write their more serious statements, artistic statements. And the person that we think of this year most when we talk about symphony, because its birthday year is Ludwig van Beethoven, who really transformed the whole idea of the symphony. And I'm just going to speak a little bit to that. I'm not going to go into much detail because there's a lot to get into. And at some point, I hope to do one of these Symphony 101s about the Beethoven symphonies, especially the one that we were supposed to perform on March 29th, which is the Eroica. But I'll just talk a little bit about the Eroica and where it lies in the spectrum of symphonic music. Up to that point, you had essentially Mozart, Haydn, the classical style. This is another thing I'm going to talk about. What is classical music? Because there's a thing called the classical style and the classical period. It's not the same thing. So a little bit of confusion there, which I hope to clear up at some point, probably in the next one, next exciting installment. But for now, I'm talking about the classical period, which is essentially 1750-ish to 1820, 1830, something like that. Okay, I'm not putting a bookend on it. It's just kind of where it is. Mozart and Haydn. So these guys wrote a lot of symphonies. Mozart wrote 41. Haydn wrote 104 symphonies that we know of, complete. And then Beethoven comes along and he writes 9. And then Schubert follows suit. And then Schumann writes 4. And Tchaikovsky writes 6 or 7. And Brahms writes 4. And so just sheer numbers. You know, we went from a guy who's writing 104 symphonies to someone who's writing 10, within that range. So what actually happened? Well, they became bigger, a lot bigger, and it happened at the Eroica. That happened at this point in musical history, 1803. Just as an example, this is Symphony by Haydn. This is Symphony number 95, so it's quite late, right? This, it's what you'd expect. I'm going to do, obviously, talking about this at some point. This is what I use. This is my score. And this symphony, I mean, I'm just doing some very basic quantitative just analysis, just looking at it. So there are 48 pages. Pretty big, right? Got it? It's not, it's just a normal size score. Well, it's a little bigger than most, but 48 pages, there it is. And then you have this monster comes along. This is 1803, this is the Eroica. And this, it's a little smaller in terms of typeset, right? So I'm just doing quantitative analysis. I'm just looking at the actual volume of music inside it. It's a little smaller than the Haydn, and this runs to 100 and I think it's 40. My apologies, 115. These bar numbers I'm thinking of. 115 pages, but it's pretty small. So it's basically twice the length of that. In fact, Haydn's last symphony, 104, is 28 minutes long. Its first movement is 8 minutes. Eroica is 47 minutes long-ish, right? Give and take the performance speed. First movement tends to be around 15 minutes, which is twice the length. So this thing's twice the size of what came before. And with that came a whole different way of using the symphony, a whole different way of expressing music on this scale. And that's really what this piece is about. And I mean, for me, the opening of it, and I'm just going to very simply look at the very, very opening of this. You have, right? I don't know if you can see this. You can, right? This is the beginning of the piece. I will talk about what this score means in a much later video. But this is what you see at the beginning. And even someone who can't read music can see that you've got these things here. Boom, boom, all the way through the orchestra. Music runs in time, right? It runs that way. So time starts here and you run through there. So it goes bam, bam, doot, 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 and on we go, right? So these are just huge statements. They're called chords. A chord is just a collection of notes played together. It can be a broken chord, a piano, guitar, but it's essentially a group of notes, boom, played together. And that's what you get at the beginning of the Eroica. You just get these two huge statements, which I'm romanticizing, but I'm thinking these are the two chords that are heard around the world. You know, the shot heard around the world. These are the two chords that really break the ground, that take us into a whole new realm. So I'm going to stop there because I have another one of these on Wednesday, but I just want to get the ball rolling. So we talked about orchestras, what an orchestra is, what a symphony orchestra is, Philharmonic, chamber, distinctions, symphony, what does symphony actually mean? We'll go into more depth at a later stage. I just wanted to give you some food for thought on this, I hope, beautiful Sunday. I'm recording this on Saturday. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please let us know. If you would like me to address any specific questions, also let us know through Facebook, through email. Stay in touch, stay in contact. It's the one thing that musicians crave is human connection, human contact, which means at this point we're obviously deprived of that, and we're doing our absolute best to make sure that we stay in touch with people and stay in touch with our community and our audience. So please let us know if you like it, if you want more, if there's anything you want me to specifically talk about. I'd be happy to do so. I hope to do a live session at some point, maybe with some questions coming in. Maybe an interview style thing. We'll see how it progresses. But I just want to get the ball rolling, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and